Welcome to Nothing Human Podcast live stream session 5 of our question and answer or whatever this is. I am currently at my house, not at my parents' as I usually would be for these. So if this is just terrible and it's just not working very well, then I am sorry. But I was a little late, running late today. Worked out late. Tried to get a Patreon post up, which I did get up. I've already gotten some comments about it, so apparently some of you have read it. But it was a little bit about the circumstances leading up to my most recent poetry blast that happened, and I shared some of those poems with you last session in session 4. I also wanted to talk to you a little bit. I've got some progress on my book. I had talked with my editor. His name is Chase Tremaine. He's a super cool dude, very, very good editor. And I explained it in one of my behind the scenes posts, but it was such a wonderful thing to be able to talk with him about the book and feel like he really got what I was going for and could help me restructure it and make it a little bit more accessible. So I'm very excited about what he's going to be able to do. He is already doing a lot of the edits that he had recommended. I pretty much agreed with every single one of his recommendations. And then he had a little bit of additional things that he wanted me to write. And so one of them was Overcoming the Offense of Jesus, which is something that I talked to him about, which was supposed to appear before the chapters about self-assessment questions for speech acts. So if you've read the draft of Truth is Not an Empty Word, you know that I have a kind of closing application as a good biblical theologian should have. And that Chase was like, well, you basically say that in order to tell the truth, you need to receive it first, because you can't tell a truth if it's not in you. He's like, but you don't tell us how to receive it. And so I thought, okay, that's interesting. I think I have some thoughts on that. Obviously, it's been a process in my life learning how to receive the truth. And so I'm writing a chapter right now. I'm almost finished with it, but it's called How to Receive the Truth. And but it starts with a quotation from Matthew 11:6, which is also quoted in Luke 7:23, where Jesus talks to the disciples of John the Baptist who have come to him and said to him, hey, are you the one that we are waiting for? Are you the Messiah, or should we keep waiting for another guy? And you got to understand, these are the disciples of John the Baptist when John the Baptist is in prison. And this is the same John the Baptist who, when he first sees Jesus, points him out in a crowd and says, behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. So this is a guy who's believed in Jesus for a long time. And honestly, his own message was one of repentance, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. And he was given that message really through angelic commission. So this is a guy who has every kind of foundation to believe that he is the forerunner of the Christ, that the Christ has indeed come, and that dude, Jesus, is the Christ. And yet, he sends his disciples to talk to Jesus while he's in prison, and he says to Jesus through his disciples, are you really the Christ? Now, if you're Jesus in that moment, where the disciples of, like, kind of the dude who was your forerunner, right? Like your hype man, and you're Jesus, and those disciples come to you really with the question from John the Baptist, who is in prison, and he says, hey, are you actually the Messiah, though? What do you feel as Jesus, the man, hearing that? Well, he's very gentle and very compassionate, as you might imagine. And he doesn't seem to indicate that he is hurt as such. But after he tells John the Baptist, or his disciples, go tell John, go tell him that. And then he talks about the blind are healed of their blindness, the lame are leaping, basically he says all these miracles are taking place, and the gospel is preached to the poor, which is the last thing he says, which is also a fulfillment of prophecy, but not miraculous, I guess. Although I guess people don't preach to the poor. Why would you? I mean, they're not going to pay you, right? Anyway, so Jesus says that. to John the Baptist. And the last thing he says to John the Baptist is this statement. He says, "Blessed is he who does not take offense at me." And the word for offense there is the same Greek word that we get the English word scandal from. And obviously, it doesn't mean exactly the same thing we mean by scandal. But there is a sense of blessed is the one who's not scandalized by me, like scandalized in their faith by me, by Jesus. Jesus is saying this. Now, John the Baptist is a guy who has a rock hard angelic commission, a message from God himself that says, you're the forerunner and that's the Christ. He doubted because circumstances didn't turn out the way he expected them to. So it's important to understand circumstances may not turn out the way that you expect them to. Do you understand? This is such a massively important thing to understand. I mean, everybody, right? Of course, things don't turn out the way I want. Yeah. But when they don't turn out the way you want, you are going to be offended with God. And so I wrote this chapter called How to Receive the Truth, and it could have been called How to Overcome the Offense of Jesus, because I'll just read you some of what I have here. Since you must receive the truth before you can declare it, the very nature of truth-telling rests on the primary foundation of truth reception. This sounds simple enough, but receiving and living in the truth has posed a stiff challenge to most human beings for most of human history. It will likely not be any easier for you and me. And I think sometimes we're a little bit arrogant. This is a little bit of a side that's not in the book. But I think this is a little bit arrogant of us to think that we're not like those other people. We don't have a hard time receiving the truth when we hear it. Oh, yes, we do. Oh, yes, we do. All of us do. The truth is hard. The truth is painful. Well, as I continue in the book, why do we humans find living in the truth so difficult? We should understand up front that intellectual obstacles account for very little of our difficulty. Okay, so that's the first thing a lot of people will say is that, ignorance is a problem. You just don't know, or you just don't understand the truth. I mean, a lot of people would even say that about the mystery of the kingdom in the scriptures. I have that article on the parables where I talk about what is the mystery of the parables, because Jesus talks about how to you the mystery has been revealed. He's talking to his disciples. And a lot of people are like, yeah, because Jesus explained the parables. There's no lack of clarity and understanding of what the parables meant, actually. When you look at a lot of the passages in the Gospels that refer to the Pharisees hearing the parables, they understood what the parables meant. It wasn't that, oh, wait, hold on. Now, who are these stewards of the vineyard who kill all of the messengers of the vineyard owner? Like, I'm not sure. Like, they understood that Jesus was talking about them. It says this in the gospel. So it's not a question of, oh, I'm sorry, without the key, I just don't understand the parables. The mystery that is revealed is something different than that. But anyway, we should understand up front that intellectual obstacles account for very little of our difficulty. It's not that we don't understand. It's not that we couldn't understand. Note what Jesus says in John 3:19 through 21. So right after John 3:16, the most famous passage in the Bible, probably, at least for now, you've got this passage in John 3:19 through 21. It says, where Jesus, continuing his thought really from John 3:16, says that anybody who doesn't believe in him is judged already, for they have not believed in him. Meaning the judgment is clear, they haven't believed in him. And then he says, this is the judgment, that the light has come into the world, and men loved the darkness rather than the light, for their deeds were evil. For everyone who does evil hates the light, and does not come to the light for fear that his deeds will be exposed. But he who practices the truth comes to the light, so that his deeds may be manifested as having been wrought in God. So, if you notice there, the main rejection of the light that occurs is not from an intellectual incapacity. It is from, it says, men loved the darkness because their deeds were evil. And the word that's used for evil there, well, there's two. Like, poneros is one of them in the Greek, and it generally means wicked, so their deeds were wicked. But then he uses a different word, phalos, when he says, for everyone who does evil hates the light. And the word for evil there is more like for everyone who does ugliness. The word is more like ugly or broken or corrupt in that sense. It's not so much wicked. So their deeds are wicked, And then he goes on and he kind of like gives you a little bit of a metaphor. Everyone who does ugly things hates the light. And that makes it a lot more obvious, where it's like, of course, if you're really, really ugly, you prefer the dark because everybody feels a little bit better in the dark if they feel ugly. They don't want harsh lights, like on their faces, showing everybody all of their flaws and faults and everything like that. It makes them feel uncomfortable. They feel exposed. They don't want to have their deeds exposed before the light. That is an affectional and volitional issue, not really an intellectual one. So I'm just trying to emphasize that. So in other words, this is continuing in the book, we reject the truth most often because it does not align with what we desire. We don't prove the truth false. I mean, we couldn't. We just hate it because it frustrates, thwarts, and exposes us. This is the objection of the will and the affections, offended that reality will not conform to them. And let me reiterate that this does not constitute any kind of rational objection, and none will be forthcoming. People come up with all sorts of post hoc, ad hoc intellectual justifications for rejecting the actual and usually apparent truth. But the basis of their foregone conclusion rarely has anything to do with reason. You see this all the time, honestly. Again, this is an aside. I'm putting in a lot of asides that are not in the book, so if you ever get the book, you can be like, man, I wish he had explained all of this. Well, I did right here. Anyway, but you see this a lot with people who are living in various different kinds of sins. And then they'll say, well, I have intellectual objections to God's forbidding whatever, living with my girlfriend or homosexual relationships or whatever. It doesn't really matter. They'll all of a sudden have intellectual justifications. Well, the scriptures doesn't really actually mean homosexual when it says homosexual. It means pederasty, as you can see from these ancient traditions and yada, yada, yada. And then, they just discard or dismiss other clear indications that that's not really what it's talking about in the text, especially like Romans 1 and things like that. But they'll say, well, that was added later, or that was misinterpreted, or any other kinds of things that people will say. What you got to understand is that the desire is what comes first, not the intellectual objection. The intellectual objection comes after as a justification of the desire. And so it's ultimately not rational. So even arguing against it rationally is useless because the truth has already been pre-rejected. They're not willing to accept if it's something other than what they desired. You understand? That's the stumbling block. That's the offense of it. So I actually believe the truth of Jesus always brings an offense or a stumbling block we must continually overcome. As he himself bore witness. I mean, he says this, even concerning one of his most ardent supporters, which you talk about, John the Baptist. Further, I'm going to say continually because I do not believe it possible to completely dispense with the offense of the truth on this side of heaven. While we still have ugliness in us and from us and around us that the truth could expose. Indeed, one will wrestle with the offense of Jesus and his truth until death, and such wrestling alone can hone the believer's mind into one conformed to the truth. Okay? So the wrestling is an indispensable part of the life of the Christian disciple. The life of the truth teller is not one of resignation or complacency, but one of growth. We are the true Israel. Israel, the name Israel, it means man who wrestles God, right? So we are those who wrestle with God. And we should remember that the way of life is narrow and hard. The easy way is the one that leads to death and destruction, if you remember. Okay? All right, so let me say this now before I get to any theories. This light is terrible. Anyway, so let me say this now before I get to any theories or recommendations. Living in the truth is painful, and there is no truthful resolution to that pain in this life. So that's fun, right? So let me say it again. Living in the truth is painful, and there is no truthful resolution to that pain in this life. So there may be a truthful and honest resolution to the pain in heaven. In fact, I believe it. I believe there is a resolution to the discrepancy between what seems and what is in heaven, in the heavenly reality coming to earth and the unity that is there. But I do not believe that there is a truthful resolution to that pain in this life. Because, and this is a quote from Solomon, And a lot of people will kind of discard Ecclesiastes, but I truly do believe that Ecclesiastes, so in Ecclesiastes, Solomon means what he says, and he says what he means. And what he says here is because in much wisdom there is much grief, and increasing knowledge results in increasing pain. That is just the truth. Anybody who says other than that is selling you something. Anyway, so if you are fully satisfied, here's another truth bomb. If you are fully satisfied and free of all soul turmoil in this life, then you are not living in the truth. You're not. So only through baseless dreams and fantasies, self-flattery, self-deception, and suppressing the truth about yourself and the world around you could you manage, and only in the short term, to feel comfortable with things as they stand. But these false comforts I liken to the leeks and onions of Egypt, right? Because the truth, painful as it is, will make you free. So the pain of the truth is the pain of responsibility, risk, and exposure. But the cost of living a lie, ultimately, is very high. It's death. You don't pay it in the short term, though. You pay it in the long term. Truth causes you to pay up front. Truth says pay up front. Lies don't even tell you ever have to pay because they're lies. They don't have to tell you anything true. The truth will tell you you will pay. You will pay for the truth. Lies will say you won't pay, but you will. You'll just pay later. And lies just make it so you don't have to pay now, but what you pay later, it isn't worth the cost of admission. So to gain your freedom in life, you must wrestle with the offense of Jesus, the stumbling block of the truth. And this offense presents to different people in different particular ways, but the general sense of the obstacle amounts to the reality that whoever you are, things aren't how you want them to be. Whoever you are, things are not how you want them to be. For now, apparently, this proves necessary in God's plan of salvation. You can strive to make reality conform to you, or you can conform yourself to reality, but you can never resolve the discrepancy. Becoming a greater servant of the truth will only deepen your awareness of the discrepancy. It cannot dissolve it. So with all that in mind, as I begin this chapter, do you still want to see? It is really interesting. Jesus, when he asked people, they were blind or they were crippled or whatnot, he asks a question that seems like a stupid question. He says, do you want to be healed? Do you want to be healed? And I mean, I guess most people are like, well, yeah, of course I do. But why would he even ask that question if it weren't a real question? And I think it is. I think it is a real question, especially when it comes to spiritual blindness. It seems to me that most people don't want to see. Not really. They don't really. I mean, they would tell you, obviously, oh, yeah, of course, I want to see. But they don't. They don't really. Because they could, and they don't. A lot of the ignorance concerning the state of the world, the state of yourself, the state of other people is willful ignorance, meaning you could know, you just choose not to. You refuse to look into things. You refuse to expose things. You're made very uncomfortable by truths when you hear them. That's just the truth. Sorry. It's the truth. And so the real obstacle oftentimes is, like if you're going to receive the truth, if you're going to overcome the offense of Jesus, you actually do have to wrestle with that fact and with the pain of it. You have to say, I'm willing to suffer. I'm willing to feel the pain of the discrepancy. And I say discrepancy, and maybe you're like, I don't know what you're talking about. What's this discrepancy that you're referring to? The discrepancy that I'm talking to, especially in intellectual terms, I mean, I talk about it here a little bit, but it's more affectional, meaning things aren't how you want them or desire them to be. And as you know, desire is the overlap of the will and the affections. And typically most people are affectional. The thing is, when you start living and you start, let's say you're not intellectual, and the truth has not been up to this point terribly important to you, and it's been kind of low on your priority list. When you start to rise it up in priority list, you'll start to see things that you didn't see before. Things that don't necessarily make you feel happy either. Things that you used to be able to enjoy, you won't be able to enjoy anymore. Things that you used to be able to appreciate, you won't be able to appreciate anymore. There will be things, it's like, I used to believe this and now I don't. Kind of think about, do you remember back in the day when they first put like Lord of the Rings movies in like 48 frames per second. I think they did The Hobbit. They did The Hobbit in 48 frames per second, like high frame rate. And remember how a lot of people were saying, well, it feels like the in 48 frames per second that the magic of the cinema is lost. Because you'd watch the movies and it was like you could tell that they were sets. It was so clear. It was so accurate. It was so piercing and detailed that you could see, oh, that's not really a stone wall. That's made of concrete that's been shaped, and it looks cheap now. Oh, that's not a orc. That's a dude in makeup with a costume on. And you would be able to tell so much more easily because of how sharp the picture was. Well, in a way, when you start to elevate the intellectual power and you start to accept, okay, I want to know the truth. I want to know the truth. You'll look around to things that used to fool you, to things that you used to be convinced by, and all of a sudden they're not convincing you anymore. You start to see, oh, that's a set. That's a costume. That's not real. And you used to believe that, like you used to go there and have a good time and feel like this is real. This relationship is real. This love this person is showing me is real. All of this stuff. So, the book I'm referencing, my own book, the extra material that I'm working on for Truth is Not an Empty Word. Katie Martin asked. I missed the beginning. What's the name of the book you were referencing? That's it. That's the book. Okay. So with that clarity, with the additional clarity, it really does affect what you're able to believe in the world, and that's not very pleasant. And the discrepancy is that things aren't what they say they are. Things aren't what they appear to be. So when you're here, and all of a sudden the truth becomes much clearer to you, and you start to be willing to receive it and not reject it, and open your eyes, and see the world. It doesn't necessarily make it a more pleasant place for you, because the problem is the discrepancy, like how things seem and how things are. You always see it's like, oh man, I just want them to be the same, like I want them to be the same. Like that's the pain of the intellect. It's like I want to draw them together and they won't stay. They won't stay together. The way they seem and the way they are won't come together, and it's so frustrating. And you'll see it everywhere. And sometimes you'll see it kind of hover into resolution for a moment. True sincerity, true authenticity, and then it'll come out again. It'll come out of focus. Even in the same moment, like the same conversation that'll happen. Even in yourself, you'll experience it. It's very unpleasant. You'll be in the midst of saying something and you're just like, I just went fake there for a second. Let me retool, My wife tells me she really hates poetry voice. I feel like my soul goes into poetry voice sometimes, like just the certain kind of pretension, the certain kind of like self-awareness that's really ugly, and it creates this double image and a separation. I don't know if that's even clear to you guys what I'm talking about, but let me just say it's not pleasant. And you don't just notice it in yourself, you notice it in other people, you notice it in the world. It's like the whole world is broken like that. It's all blurry. It's all like out of phase or something. And it's frustrating. It's really frustrating because it's like when you see something that's kind of out of focus, like when the projector is kind of out of focus and you're like, oh, I wish I could just tweak it just a little bit. Then it would, you wish that you could do that, and you can't. It doesn't work. Like you can't make it so. So I think that's one of the reasons that I believe Jesus gave us the sacraments, particularly the sacrament of the Lord's Supper, which we don't usually think of the sacrament of the Lord's Supper as a like an epistemological reality, but it is, because the Lord's Supper is holding in tension two realities at the same time. Because, like if you think about the Catholic and Protestant conversation about the real presence or what the communion means, you'll notice that there's some that are like, it has to literally become like hemoglobin and sinew in order for it to be called the body and blood of Jesus. So you have theories like transubstantiation or consubstantiation. And then on the other hand, you have like the Protestant view, which is like, well, no, that never happens. That does not happen. Therefore, we would say it is more symbolic. It is a representation. It's a sign. But there's problems both ways. But let me just say, at least as far as like the more Zwinglian approach, like the Zwingli approach that says basically it's a symbol and a memorial. The problem with that is that Jesus had the opportunity to say that like a lot, and he didn't. If you read in John, he's losing his disciples. Like the disciples, he's like, you have to eat my flesh and drink my blood or you'll have no part of my kingdom. And it says that there was disciples that were grumbling and they were like, this is a really hard saying. That's gross. And also like drink your blood. Like that's a curse. You're supposed to drink blood. Have you read the Old Testament? And so Jesus is sitting there and he could have been like, oh, whoa, 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 whoa. Whoa, 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 whoa. Like, hold on a second. I just mean it, like symbolically, and that would have been easy enough. And he doesn't. They're leaving. And he's like, I mean, they even tell him, they're like, this is a really hard saying. Are you sure you don't want to dial that back? And he's like, nope. This is in John, by the way. I think it's in John 8. But, I don't remember references. But let's see if I can find it for you. Well, here's the truth will make you free. Thank you, John 8. And this is when he tells the Jews that they are the devil of the devil. Nope, wasn't in John 8. Okay, well, here's a case where knowing my references would be helpful, maybe. See, the credentials committee was right. But I can also just put in blood body and search for it. And not find it then either. Wow, this is a real example. Never mind then. Just take my word for it or go look it up yourself. Anyway, the issue here is that Jesus had the opportunity to say, no, I mean this symbolically, and he didn't. And the disciples even left. A lot of disciples left. It said they were leaving him because they couldn't accept this. Okay, and then he asked his own disciples, are you going to leave too? And they said, where would we go? You have the words of life. Okay, so they maybe just didn't even know what he meant or whatever, but like he definitely said, you got to eat my body and drink my blood. Okay, so if God says something is so, is it so? Yes. I mean, he created the earth with his word. John 6:60. Sweet. Got hooked up by my friend Lisa. Okay, so let's look up John 6. I wonder why I didn't find it when I put in body and blood. All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and read this, though, real quick. This is a long chapter, huh? All right, so the Jews began to argue with one another. This is 6:52. Let's see. All right, we're going to go up a little bit further. John 6, chapter 41. Therefore, the Jews were grumbling about him because he said, I am the bread that came down out of heaven. So the Jews are grumbling here, okay? And they were saying, is not this Jesus, the son of Joseph, whose father and mother we know? How does he now say, I have come down out of heaven? Jesus answered and said to them, do not grumble among yourselves. No one can come to me unless the Father who sent me draws him, and I will raise him up on the last day. It is written in the prophets, and they shall all be taught of God. Everyone who has heard and learned from the Father comes to me. Not that anyone has seen the Father, except the one who is from God. He has seen the Father. Truly, truly, I say to you, he who believes has eternal life. I am the bread of life. Your fathers ate the manna in the wilderness, and they died. This is the bread which comes down out of heaven, so that one may eat of it and not die. I am the living bread that came down out of heaven. If anyone eats of this bread, he will live forever. And the bread also which I will give for the world, for the life of the world, is my flesh. Okay. Then the Jews, again, these are people who don't necessarily believe in him, began to argue with one another, saying, how can this man give us his flesh to eat? So Jesus said to them, truly, truly I say to you, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in yourselves. He who eats my flesh and drinks my blood has eternal life, and I will raise him up on the last day. For my flesh is true food, and my blood is true drink. He who eats my flesh and drinks my blood abides in me, and I in him. As the living Father sent me, and I live because of the Father, so he who eats me, he also will live because of me. This is the bread which came down out of heaven. Not as the fathers ate and died, he who eats this bread will live forever. These things he said in the synagogue as he taught in Capernaum. Therefore, many of his disciples, now again, this is moving from the Jews to the disciples. These are people who actually were his disciples. When they heard this, they said, this is a difficult statement. Who can listen to it? But Jesus, conscious that his disciples grumbled at this, said to them, does this cause you to stumble? What then if you see the Son of Man ascending to where he was before? It is the Spirit who gives life. The flesh profits nothing. The words that I have spoken to you are spirit and are life. But there are some of you who do not believe. For Jesus knew from the beginning who they were who did not believe and who it was that would betray him. And he was saying, for this reason I have said to you that no one can come to me unless it has been granted him from the Father. As a result of this, many of his disciples withdrew and were not walking with him anymore. So Jesus said to the 12, you do not want to go away also, do you? Simon Peter answered him, Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. We have believed and have come to know that you are the Holy One of God. Okay. I could just keep reading. I love the book of John. But thank you for finding that for me, Lisa. So you notice, like, Jesus really doubles down on that. And he could have not. Like, seriously, like, I mean, you read the text and you're like, dude, this guy is, like, he's getting really hardcore about it. Like, no, you must eat my flesh and drink my blood. My flesh is true food. My blood is true drink. Like, he's, like, really, really, like, he does not sit there and be like, oh, whoa, hold on now. You guys are misunderstanding me. I'm just trying to be memorial, symbolical here. You know, he's not like that. There's a unity in the way that he's talking about it that I think makes us very uncomfortable. If you read John Calvin's take on the Lord's Supper, he will make you very uncomfortable too. He's very Catholic. Even in the Institutes, I'm serious. Like, go and read in the Institutes of Christian Religion. You know, John Calvin at this point was already fully rejecting Roman Catholic approach to most everything. But his approach to the sacraments, especially the Lord's Supper, very, kind of uncomfortably, not literal, but very, like, take it seriously. Like, this is real. And so what's weird is the tension of this, right? The tension of the discrepancy, because on one hand, the Lord's Supper, when you're holding the bread and you're holding the wine, you're like, this is not the body and blood of Jesus. And there's a sense in which that's true. On the other hand, when you're holding the bread and the wine, you could say this is the body and blood of Jesus. He said so. So it's true. And I think what the sacrament is pointing to is the resolution of the discrepancy. It's actually like asking you to believe in faith that the discrepancy will be resolved. That how this seems and how it is ultimately is going to be unified. And it can be, even now, through faith. That's the thing, is you can receive it as the body and blood of Jesus through faith, and the discrepancy be resolved. I was talking to my mom, my wife about this, and they were kind of like, this all seems really weird. But John, particularly, the Apostle John, was super into this idea. And I want to say that there is, this should work. All right, it did. So in John, in Revelation, where he talks about the tree of life, I want to mention, this is in Revelation 22, which would be, this is like the end of the book, right? But I want you to note something. Okay, so in Revelation 22, verse 1, it says, and this is John writing again, then he showed me a river of the water of life, clear as crystal, coming from the throne of God and of the Lamb, in the middle of its street. And on either side of the river was the tree of life, bearing 12 kinds of fruit, yielding its fruit every month, and the leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations. There will no longer be any curse, and the throne of God and the Lamb will be in it, and his bondservants will serve him. Okay, so I want you to notice, because you see tree of life, you're like, well, last time I heard about the tree of life was the Eitz Chaim in Genesis, right? Where God says, you know, you're not allowed to go to the tree of life, and so he keeps he has the two cherubim that are in front with the sword turning in all directions and on the east of Eden, and you're not allowed to get in there. And if you note this, by the way, this picture of the cherubim guarding the way to the tree of life is maintained actually even in the symbolism of the tabernacle and the temple, when you have the cherubim that are usually, you know, like this with their wings touching, two cherubim that are protecting on the curtain of the Babylonian tapestry that was protecting the Holy of Holies, meaning you're not allowed in here. It's protected by cherubim. So there's a sense in which the Holy of Holies, the very presence of God, in the tabernacle and in the temple, is sort of repicturing this sort of Edenic moment of our communion with God in the garden, which, you know, we're only allowed at this point to enter into at the cost of life. Because you can think, like, if you were to look and see these two cherubim that are standing there, and then there's blood, because you would sprinkle the blood, you know, there. If you were to see that blood, you know, splattered on the ground there between the angels, if you saw that in front of the Garden of Eden, you'd assume somebody tried to get in there that wasn't supposed to be in there. And I think that was part of the picture. Okay, so you have this idea of the tree of life being protected and you're not having access to it. And also the idea that the tree of life is connected to this necessary death. Well, these two images, the necessary death, the sacrifice, and the tree of life image are kind of joined together in Revelation. You probably don't notice it, though, because it just says tree of life. But the word for tree, for a living tree, in Greek usually is dendron. But the word, if you look it up in Revelation 22 that's used, that John uses particularly, is xulon. And xulon, actually, it means wood, tree, or staff, or post. It's also used, you will notice, if you look up the word, you'll see that it is used oftentimes, and it's translated cross. In fact, if you say, cursed is everyone who hangs upon a tree, that will generally speaking be translated xulon out of the Greek, even in the Septuagint, because it's not really a tree as such. The word for in Hebrew for wood and tree is the same word, but in Greek it's a different word. So in Greek, if you have a living tree, right, you'd call it a dendron. If you're talking about the wood of a tree, you generally call it xulon. So it's a different word. The Hebrews didn't have a different word for wood as opposed to tree. So it says, so when you're looking in the Old Testament, it says, curses everyone who hangs upon a tree. Really could be saying, curses everyone who hangs upon a post, a gibbet, a cross, etc. And that's why it's applied to Jesus, who hangs upon the xulon of the cross. Okay, so again, when you're looking at this, either side of the river was the tree of life, and instead of using what would normally be used for the idea of a living tree, you have this word xulon, which is generally speaking referring to a post, a staff, a wood. It starts to make you wonder, well, what is that supposed to mean? And what it's supposed to mean is that the tree of life is the cross of life, and that the fruit that it bears, which is 12 fruit that it bears, yielding fruit every month, it's food. Fruit is food. You eat fruit. So, like, and you're like, well, why 12? Why 12 fruits? Well, why do you think 12 fruits? Why 12 disciples? Why 12 tribes? Um, because they are represented in Jesus. So, in a sense, there's this weird way of like, are you on the cross? Yes, you are. You unify with Jesus in the cross. And are you also food for your brothers and sisters? Yes. Yes, you are. And what does that mean? I don't know, but it's real and it's something. And I think when you look at it, you're like, well, it's a symbol. It refers to something. Okay, what does it refer to? Truly, I think that's the problem. Like, what if what you're seeing in Revelation is reality stripped of its appearances? Because I think we usually read Revelation, and you think this is symbols, and that's fine. But he doesn't call them symbols; he calls them signs. And the thing about a sign, when you're talking about a sacrament is also called a sign. Weird thing about a sacrament, though, is that it is what it points to. Do you see that? It's a sign, but it's a thing that points to what it is. So there's again, the sacrament is a sign, but it's a sign that is what it points to. Meaning, it's not just that it points to Jesus. When you receive it, you are receiving Jesus if you receive it in faith. Which means that it's this weird thing where the discrepancy for this one little tiny moment is resolved through faith. But the spiritual reality, like the heavenly reality, which is not a non-material or non-earth, non-sensible reality, eventually will be that same way. No discrepancy, total resolution. And it's very possible that's what John was experiencing, carried along by the Spirit, when he was peering at these things, because he saw these things. These were things that, like, he, sensed to some degree. And I think it's really important to understand that those are not symbols. It's like, well, was there a great dragon that came and was attacking a woman who was giving birth to a child and then, came after her other children? Yeah, there totally was. Like, yeah, there totally was. Like, could you see it? No, probably not. But like, we don't see hardly anything. um, I've wondered, like if it says we see through a glass dimly, darkly, that there's a veil of ignorance that's over us, that we are seeing in a body of death. We don't see things as they actually are, and we certainly don't see spiritual realities as they actually are. And so the opportunity that we have in the sacrament is for a moment through faith to see the trajectory of the resolution of our discrepancies. While at the same time, I think, you're still holding in your hand the fact that you live in a broken reality. And both those things are true at the same time. So I would want people to believe both those things at the same time. You live in a broken reality. The discrepancy will not be resolved. That's part of your wrestling. Your wrestling is overcoming that as much as you can and accepting it as well, and recognizing there's very little you can do about it. You can pray about it. You can talk to God about it. He sees it, obviously. He has a plan, and that's part of what causes you to have faith and trust in him. And it's also something that causes you to lean, I think, more heavily on those moments of reconciliation that God has made possible through the sacraments, and to value the sacraments for what they grant to us: moments of reconciliation, moments of resolution, moments where the discrepancy is resolved momentarily. Again, for a time, we glimpse it, you see it. I think that's what John was granted in Revelation. I think that's oftentimes what we are granted in spiritual sight. Kind of a resolution, a removing of the appearances that are wrong. Again, like the appearances that aren't saying the thing that is true of the thing that is, right? So anyway, that's my thoughts about that. It's a little bit weird, I understand, but I have more and more thought of Revelation not as being literal and not as being symbolic, but as something else, as spiritual, honestly. And I've started to view spirit. I think when people say spiritual, they have a tendency to think of spiritual in the same way that they use the word abstract. And so, like, it's like a non-material concept, like a conceptual framework or something. But spiritual doesn't mean that. That's not what spiritual just means. Spiritually produced. That's what Jesus is saying, is that the Spirit is what brings life. And these are words of the Spirit and words of life. And so, to that extent, like, do you receive the sacrament as a word of life? Yes, you do. And as a word of life, it creates something. It's real. It is something. It is what it says it is. And why is it what it says it? God said it. God said it was. So is it? Yeah, definitely it is. And you can receive it that way in faith. And when you do, you have that moment of resolution, the moment of reconciliation. God in his plan has the intention of reconciling all things to himself, of eventually removing all that is false from the world, and eventually of resolving all things that are currently divorced and ruptured, and all of the discrepancies will be removed eventually. That's his plan. And he's promising that in the sacrament. When you take it in faith, you can taste it for a moment. You can live in that for a moment. So that's what I would recommend you do. I have a little bit more of the new chapter, but I probably won't read much more of it. I am the last. Sorry. The last thing I wrote here in this chapter's heading, I haven't gotten to this part, but I just thought it was so funny because the sentence says, "It's already bad. Let's make it worse." Anyway, yeah, so that's what you have to look forward to in this chapter. I pretty much I talk about fact and meaning. I talk about the really the inadequacy of either fact or meaning on their own, how they need to be put together in order to be made sense of. I talk about how wisdom governs the relationship between the two in this chapter. And then at the end, because anyway, I'm not going to tell you yet. I have to work it out. Because I have to explain it in a way that's not just really confusing. I've been experimenting on my mom, which sounds weird, but I'll bring up things with her and with my wife and just say, what do you think about this? Like, is this a confusing way of thinking about it, or does that make sense? And this is still the relationship between form and content when it comes to the truth is something that a lot of people so far that I've talked to have been a little confused by. Partly because I think it actually is confusing. Because I'll ask you a question, and this will maybe mess you up a little bit. Is the spirit or the body the form? So, like, is the spirit or the body the form, or is the spirit or the body the content? Now, normally when you talk about like body and spirit, you talk about the body like it's a container, and then the spirit is almost like inside the container of the body. So in that sense, you'd say like body, form, yeah, and spirit, content. But if you know anything about Platonism, you'll know that the word form is not a material word. He doesn't use it materially. He says that the ideal form is a spiritual reality, that the spiritual reality is what gives shape to the material world. So in that sense, in the Platonic sense, the spiritual is the form or the structure, the shaping, and it kind of molds almost like an exoskeleton the material world into what shape it's in. Now, you might be like, well, that's Plato. Thing is, it's also the case that the Bible talks about it in these terms, which is really weird. The Bible talks about it in both terms. That's the real confusing thing. Is it's not that you're like, oh, so it's not body form, spirit content. It's actually body content, spirit form. No, it's actually it's talked about in both ways. So if you're confused, you're like, good. But like so I'll look this up in James. I love that the first time I tried to do this, it did not work at all, but it's working now. Okay, so in James 2:26, it says, now listen to this statement, because I think we've heard it so many times, you don't really think about the parallels being made, but it says, for just as the body without the spirit is dead, so also faith without works is dead. Now, generally speaking, now just think about it. Generally speaking, you think of faith as being a spiritual reality and works as being something that's done by the body, right? So you think faith is spiritual and works are material. And in the same way, you'd kind of think of, well, then the works are the form, and then the faith is what is inside of it, giving it life, like that's what you'd kind of think. But that's not the metaphor that he's making here. It's weird, but he says, just as the body without the spirit is dead, so also faith without works is dead. So notice faith here is actually being connected to the body. Works is being connected to the spirit. So in a sense, what he's saying is that works are the spirit of faith. What? It's just like way out there. It's a very weird idea, because what that means is that, okay, you can look at that and you'd be like, all right, is faith the form or the content? Either. Are works the form or the content? Either. Like depending on what you're talking about, depending on how you're talking about it. Now, what that means is that depending on what is useful to talk about, here's what I think is really important about this, that neither form nor content are supreme, in the same way that neither body or spirit is. Like you can't say, well, the body is important, but the spirit's not really important, or the body is most important, or you'd say the spirit is most important and like the body is no, it's like a catenary arch. They are resting upon one another in such a way that they're both absolutely necessary, and in some sense, like a catenary arch, in some sense, you couldn't say like one is more important than the other. You can't even hardly say that one is like preceding the other. They're built together in a way that is undisentangleable, which I think I've used in the podcast, which is just a stupid word, but it's true. I think it's really important to keep that in mind. I'll make sure to make the chapter of the book as confusing as possible for all of you. But the reason why this matters for the truth is that I'm talking about the issue of facts and meaning. And again, you tend to think of facts as form, meaning as content. It also could be the fact could be that meaning is the form and facts are the content. Because they actually do work either way. I know, like, this is the thing where, like, no, but it does make sense, because there's some times where, you might think, oh, well, meaning, I'm just waiting for the facts to develop a meaning. No, you're not. The meaning, you can't help but shape and select facts on the basis of a meaning. You can't help it. Like, it has to be done. Okay? But the meaning and the facts, then they have to work together, because if you've read anything about structuralism, you know that, for instance, there are scientific revolutions, or there are what they call a paradigm shift. A paradigm shift is exactly this. A paradigm is what I'm talking about. When meaning is used as a form, you call it a paradigm, right? And that is a thing that happens, that people use what they already think to be the case, and then they select and they shape the facts in order to make it work within the meaning that they have already established, until the facts start to kind of revolt. Not all the facts, obviously, but just like the ones that they didn't select, they start to grow in number and they start to become a little bit more rebellious. And this fact doesn't really work with your paradigm. It's not working at all. And so all of a sudden you start saying, oh, well, maybe I need to alter my paradigm in order to account for these facts. And that's what you see happening. The classic example in the history of science is when they shifted over from the geocentric to the heliocentric model of the solar system, which we call the solar system now. And anyway, that is a difficult thing to think about, but it's happening all the time. That you have certain kind of ideas that are selecting and shaping facts that you're willing to receive. But sometimes the facts are so numerous or so in your face that they say, hey, by the way, your paradigm couldn't possibly account for these things. So maybe you need to shift your paradigm. That happens. That's what happened apparently with the shift from the geocentric to the heliocentric model. Okay, but that happens all the time, and it will happen with you too. But what you have to understand is it's not ever the case that you're just developing a bunch of facts and gathering facts and then just, wherever it falls, it falls. No, you're only going to select facts and you're going to organize facts only according to an understanding or a meaning that you already have. Even if it's a hypothesis, that is going to govern to some extent which facts you see and how you receive those facts, how you organize those facts, and which ones you aren't even able to see or aren't even able to find. That's really important. So that's why I'm saying that you should not subordinate meaning to facts. You should not subordinate facts to meaning in the same way that you shouldn't subordinate form or content. They are catenary arch. You have to recognize that they rest upon each other, and there's a certain kind of a synergy that, sometimes you've got to shift the meaning to accommodate the facts. Sometimes you shift your understanding of the facts to accommodate a meaning. You're doing this all the time anyway, so don't be too uncomfortable about it. But if you're like, well, yeah, but what governs the relationship between those two things? Glad you asked, is wisdom. Wisdom governs the relationship between those things. Wisdom governs which side is which and which side needs to give. It governs the relationship between when the meanings need to accommodate the facts, when the facts need to accommodate the meanings. Because, again, you could be like, well, facts would never have to accommodate meanings. They do, because you have to select them. Like, what's relevant? I mean, you don't know what's relevant unless you have a meaning. You know what I'm saying? Otherwise, it's just everything. No selected facts. Just literally everything. That's what you need. Everything. Every time you speak, if you're going to speak the truth, you have to speak every single word that can be spoken. Or you're not telling the truth. No. Well, then how do you select? Well, according to a meaning of a purpose, a goal. It's like, well, how do you determine that? Wisdom. Okay, so that probably concludes our time for tonight. Thank you for taking this journey with me on the new material I'm trying to write for Chase. He's probably like, get me this new material immediately. I've got a lot coming up, so I need to write truth in the New Testament, which is a chapter to counter falsehood in the New Testament. I have a new preface to the Speech Acts chapters, where I discuss why I'm not just pharisaically giving you legalistic guidelines, but maybe I am. I have a couple of appendix essays, an appendix essay covering all the other Hebrew terms for lying and deception, which is what Chase wants. I don't want to do that, but I'm doing it because he asked me to. An appendix essay on material good and evil, probably utilizing content from other chapters. An appendix essay on absolute and relative truth. He wants to take a lot of that material and put it in appendices, which I think is a good idea. That way we can tighten up the argument of the book. And if you want to talk more about these, what I would consider to be more like tangential issues, I can connect to that in these appendix essays. An appendix on the Word of God, an appendix on the infallibility of Scripture. So these are things I have to prepare. And then he wants me to do a mini essay for a new conclusion. which has all sorts of other. It's like basically like a bunch of questions, like what's the difference between lying and being incorrect or ignorant? Intentionally deceiving versus being deceived and accidentally deceiving others. On fiction and acting, Santa Claus and other socially acceptable falsehoods. The talk and protecting children from mature facts. Okay, so there's a lot. He's got a lot. He's made a big order here of things, but I'm just working through it as I can go through it, and I've been a little bit slow. But this month is the month that I'm gonna knock all this stuff out. So I'm really excited to share some of this with you as I get it a little bit more well organized. It is challenging. Okay, it is 7:30. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining me tonight and for being such a kind audience. And I don't think it was that bad on the streaming. I don't think it shut down or anything. I don't know. You guys will tell me. So that's good. Maybe I'll just keep on doing it here because this is way more convenient. I've had to move my computer and my microphone and my audio unit and my everything over to my parents' house and like set all up over there, and it's not fun. So if I can just do this, I probably will. But thank you all for being here and for engaging, and Lisa for helping me with John 6:60. That was helpful. See, again, I don't need to know these references because I have live chat people who can tell me things. Sorry. All right. I'll talk to you all later. Thank you so much. Bye.